The interview is taking place at the Chemung County Historical Society in Elmira, New York. And the person being interviewed is Bruce Peer. Bruce, would you start by giving us your birth date and your address and the service branch you were in and so forth?
I was born in Elmira in 1946, October 16th. And I lived most of my life in Horseheads, but I currently live at 2501 Oak Hollow Road, Vestal, New York.
Okay.
I was in the Navy, enlisted when I lived in Horseheads, and I was in the Navy 65 to 69.
Where did you serve in the Navy, Bruce?
The first stop was boot camp in San Diego,
Okay.
then on to communications school in Pensacola, Florida, and my first duty was in Adak, Alaska.
How did you happen to end up with, well, I guess to start with, how did you happen to end up in communications? Was that your choice or the Navy's choice?
Well, I initially wanted to be a corpsman, but...
Medical corpsman?
Medical corpsman, that was my desire.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't make the cut, and so the fallback was communications. And I'm glad I took that path.
How has that affected your life since the Navy?
Well, I have a lot of good memories of my people I served with, and some of the things that I did were very unique because of the very top secret nature of the work.
Mm-hmm.
We were all given top secret cryptographical clearances, and we were basically listening in and recording some countries that were not friendly to America, the Soviets and the North Koreans. And when I was in the Pacific, that's what we generally did. I was able to turn Russian intercept that came off the air into English text. That was one of the things that I learned, and that was very interesting and intriguing to me.
Was that done electronically?
It was done via radio teletype, most of it, and radio intercept.
What special kind of quality, if I might ask, did you bring that caused them to put you in? This is a very esoteric, kind of sophisticated assignment. I mean, it's wonderful, I think. But...
Well, I've always had a great attention to detail,
mm-hmm.
and I don't like to brag, but I always felt that I was the best at converting the Russian text in English.
Can you speak Russian, or do you understand Russian?
Not anymore.
But you could then.
I could, basically. I could.
Did you go to the Monterey School in California? Is that where you learned?
No, but some of my compatriots did.
Did they?
Yeah, I learned in Pensacola, but I served with people who came out of the Monterey School who were more the intercept group, and we were the communication group who took that information that we got off the air and distributed it worldwide, including the White House and National Security Agency. We were very much attached to the National Security Agency.
What kind of preparation did they give you, Bruce? What kind of schooling did you go through?
It was 6 months, very intensive communication training, learning how to operate the cryptographic equipment. Mm-hmm. We had some very sophisticated at the time equipment, which was electronic and used key cards and card readers. But at the same time, we had real old offline equipment. We could take messages and encrypt them and just send them out over the unsecure airwaves. It was much like what people see when they look at the Enigma machine. Mm-hmm. We had a very similar machine in America called the KW-47, series of rotors and a keyboard, and that was used for offline in case something happened to your online encrypted radio frequency.
What part of this training allowed you to pursue a career afterwards? Did it change your career focus as you left the Navy?
It did. Yeah. Well, I grew up on a farm pretty much after my teen, age 12 on, and I lived on a farm pretty much and worked every day as a farmer. And when I got out of the service, I initially started out as a carpenter, but I quickly realized it wasn't my calling. So I got into more of the administrative type work, and that's been my lifelong career now. I just retired from New York State Electric and Gas after 32 years, and I worked some other jobs in administrative type work, and I think that all relates back to my work in the military.
What rank did you achieve as you went through your career?
My ultimate rank was communication technician, second class, petty officer. I was a supervisor at the Naval Communications Center in Kamasei, Japan, when I left the service.
How long were you on this?
For 4 years.
4 years?
Active duty. Yeah.
And now you said your first assignment after school was in Alaska?
Yes.
Was that what we would, I guess, euphemistically call a listening post of some kind?
It was a listening post. It was isolated duty. It was not far from some of the war zone of World War II. It was out in Tika Island. I think it was one more out from Adak, or two more out from Adak. And the old Quonset huts from World War II were still there. That was one of the fun things to do on the island, since it was isolated duty, was to trek around and take a look at the old Quonset huts and see if there was any World War II remnants left, that you might be able to pick up. But it was very much isolated duty.
How long were you there?
14 months.
What kind of living conditions did you have out there?
We were under one roof, everything. We lived.
Well, who was we? How many people?
Oh, gosh, there were several hundred of us there.
Really?
Yes. We worked around the clock, of course, so we had to man all the
Shifts. Yeah.
And there were people there to support us, like cooks and all the people that it takes to run a outpost, electricians and whatever. But we were isolated from the rest of the mainland and off in our own little corner. And the only time we went out of our area where we lived, ate, slept, and had a little fun was when we went to work. The facility was just across the road, and a concrete, apparently what I heard, lead-covered building, no windows, very secure, and that's where we worked.
And it was near what other kind of facility?
There was a port, a naval port in Adak, Alaska, a few miles away.
How much time did you actually spend on ships in the Navy? Much at all?
None.
None?
I was a landlocked sailor.
Did that disappoint you? I mean, did you go in the Navy to be on a ship? Or?
No.
How did you choose the Navy?
Well, a friend of mine kind of talked me into it. We went in under the buddy plan. He wanted to go in the Navy, and I said, well, Navy's as good as any other, and I wasn't even thinking about whether I wanted to be on a ship or not, but we went in under the buddy plan, thinking that we'd serve at least through boot camp together and we'd be able to support each other. Well, we saw each other for one day. When we got to boot camp, of course, all rules were off and all agreements, and he went one way and I went another, and that's how we started, under the buddy plan.
Is this right out of high school?
Shortly thereafter, about 5 months after.
Yeah, I was in the Air Force, and I enlisted in the Air Force in January, graduated from high school in June, so it was about 6 months. I mean, it was at that point I realized that I didn't know what I was going to do, and so the Air Force was a good choice, and it was an excellent choice. Yeah. What happened after Alaska, Dad? What was the next step?
Well, the Navy then rewarded me with duty in Kamasei, Japan. The sailors often talked about, you got this lousy duty in Adak, and hopefully you'll get one of the premier duty stations, Kamasei being one of them. And I was blessed. I got to stay in Japan for 2 years, lived there, made friends with the local people, and had just a wonderful time. Climbed Mount Fuji with some friends over a couple days, and really enjoyed myself. It was like night and day. It's a whole new world.
How long were you in Alaska? 2
years.
Wow.
Oh, Alaska was 14 months. Well, Japan was 2 years.
It seemed like 2 years.
It seemed like eternity.
Yeah. Did other people go up and stay longer than that, or did they kind of pace so that they didn't keep people there?
They limited the duty to 12 months, pretty much. How I got kind of stuck there for a few extra weeks, I'm not sure, but I was counting the days and the minutes and the hours until I was able to go to Japan.
I mean, with lots of creature comforts, I mean, did they take good care of you up there? Outside of the fact you were isolated.
We had pretty good food.
NCO club?
We had an NCO club. I didn't spend a lot of time there, but we listened to music. We played cards. We had a diver in our group, in our barracks, and he would go out and he'd catch king crab and bring king crab back, throw them in the hot pot, and we'd be able to sit around and eat Alaskan king crab, which was a treat. In fact, I got a chance to actually visit one of the Japanese fishing vessels there that processed the king crab, and that was very interesting. But it fed us good, but we always look forward to the once-a-month shipment from the mainland where there'd be fresh milk. Yeah. We'd have fresh milk for just a few days a month, and that's the one thing I always missed.
No leave from that place?
No, I had no leave, no.
Yeah. Why? Is that for security reasons, or was it just logistically a problem? Or?
It would have been a long trip.
Yeah.
to get back.
There wasn't an air base there or anything?
There was, but it still would have been like more than a day to get home, more than a day. If I wanted to go home, more than a day to get back. And at that point, I hadn't accumulated a lot of vacation time because I had just taken a break after boot camp to visit my house, and then after communication training. So I was pretty much locked.
So you were in school for 6 weeks? Did you
6
say?
months.
6 months, and then 14 months in Alaska,
Yes,
and then off to Japan. So you really had 2 duty stations, really.
pretty much. Yeah.
And so you were telling me a little bit before the interview that there was some things going on in Japan that you were intimately involved in. Why don't we pursue that a little bit?
Well, my career was in the Navy was kind of uneventful when you compare what I did with a lot of Vietnam veterans. You know, I mean, I was more of a support role, more of a spy kind of thing. Was kind of interesting. But one of the incidents in my life that I'll never forget was on January 23rd, 1968, when the Koreans seized the USS Pueblo in international waters. I don't know how many people remember the Pueblo as they view this, but the anniversary of the, frustrating to me, the anniversary always goes by, forgotten by most Americans and ignored by the news media, but Commander Bucher, who was in charge of the Pueblo when the ship was seized, would like us to remember for one unselfish reason. And I think most Americans would today agree that something must be done to turn around this popular perception of our country as being unable or unwilling to defend our interests around the world. You know, and especially after September 2001, you know, when we were hit by the terrorists, and then we fought the war in Afghanistan, we're now fighting the war in Iraq, our forces are spread thin. It's an important time to reflect back on events like that in our country's history, the Pueblo being one of them. And now we've got North Korea once again rearing its belligerence to the United States and its hostile attitude toward the United States, and it's one of our biggest threats.
Why did they pick the Pueblo? Well,
the Pueblo was operating in international waters off the North Korean coast. It was listening in on the North Koreans and on the Soviets. That was its job, to test the Korean Communist communications. And the North Koreans, of course, were angry at us for having this spy ship operating up and down its coast. And so they sent a bunch of armed ships out. First we thought it would be just to intimidate us because it had done that before with some of the other ships, but this time they meant business. They actually encircled the Pueblo, and the Pueblo was a very slow ship. It couldn't get away because they had torpedo boats going around it. And they also had Russian MiGs, and there was no other American military nearby that could help, could assist. And here it was the Pacific in January, and there was no choice but for the Pueblo to surrender. In fact, Commander Bucher was ordered not to use his machine gun that was on the ship, his 50 caliber machine gun, or use any other weapons, under the concern that he might create an international incident. So he was ordered to keep his gun stowed, and the Koreans took advantage of this. They swarmed over the railing of that ship, and they told the Americans to follow the ship into Wonsan. And that's what the commander did, slowly, hoping that help would arrive, but it never did. And I can still remember the final message from the Commander Bucher, because I saw it come over the airways when I was the message center supervisor in Seya. He says, "Have 0 keyless," meaning the encryption type cards. They were all destroyed. There were fires all over the Pueblo when the Koreans got on the ship because we were trying to destroy all the secret documents. And the folks like myself, the communication technicians, were battering away at that equipment that they had with axes and sledgehammers, trying to prevent the Koreans from, getting any of our secrets. Mm-hmm. So the commander followed very slowly. One man was killed as the attack took place on the Pueblo. There were several injuries. Commander Bucher himself was injured. Mm-hmm. Shot, suffered some shrapnel wounds, and there were several other casualties. But there were 80 officers and men and 2 civilian technicians who were taken into captivity that day. Oh, I forgot I was going to tell you the message.
Oh, God.
Like it was yesterday. Then I'll get to the captivity. But he said, "Have 0 keyless," and this only one have. have been requested follow into Wonsan, have not used my weapons nor uncovered 50 caliber machine gun. That was his orders. Have several wounded and one man with leg blown off. Have sustained small wounds in rectum. Do not intend to offer any resistance. Please send help. These guys mean business. That was the last message from Pueblo. And then, of course, the men were taken into Wonsan, and they were paraded down the main street there, and they were harassed by the North Koreans, and they were in prison and threatened to the point where, in prison, where several had attempted suicide. But one of the officers, and I forget which one it was, said, kind of tried to keep faith in his country, by thinking and talking about that this country's not going to let these North Koreans get away with this. We're bound to seek revenge, and we're bound to do something to get the prisoners out of North Korea. But the help never came, and the North Koreans kept our folks in prison, and they weren't released until people may remember the televised press conferences, the letters of confession, and the televised or the published letters that some of the crewmen sent to the president, basically admitting that they were a spy ship. And shortly after that, there was an agreement at Panmunjom, North Korea, for release of the crew on December 23rd, 1968.
Why do you suppose we didn't defend ourselves?
Well, I've read a lot about it, and we were too far away. We had our own airplanes in South Korea, but this was late in the afternoon, and it would have been dark by the time we would have gotten to Wonsan. And the concern was that they would scuttle the ship, and the crew would go down with the ship into that cold Pacific, and they wouldn't have lived. So probably it went for the best, because if there had been a confrontation, I think that North Korea would have won as far as the murder of our crewmen on the Pueblo.
Do you suppose they were clever enough to know that this timing element of getting aircraft support, air support?
They knew.
This was well planned from that standpoint.
I'm sure it was. They had harassed other ships that we had in the area. There's another kind of a sister ship to the Pueblo called the Banner, and the North Koreans had sent out other ships to intimidate them, to harass them, to threaten them. And Booker had been warned, hey, expect this for your own ship. But by all means, don't fire. Don't be engaging them in a battle, because who knows what will happen. There'll be an international incident, because North Koreans are known for not backing down and for being a belligerent state.
How many crew on the ship?
There were 82 crewmen and 2 civilian technicians. Crew meaning officers and enlisted.
And these were people that you were in touch with routinely just because of what you did?
Yes.
What kind of a facility, to the extent you can tell me, what kind of a facility did you have in Japan?
Very similar to the one in Alaska. It was very secure. It was probably half a mile from where we lived. We used to have to walk through secure gates, guarded gates, back into a very secure facility. And I was the message center supervisor, which means that I was in charge of all the incoming and outgoing messages in a special section of the communication center. And we had technicians who repaired the equipment. We had administrative people like officers who would prepare a lot of the message and do a lot of the interpreting. We had interpreters who would send messages to the government and to NSA to keep track of what the North Koreans were saying over the airways, what they were doing, and same with the Russians.
Yeah. Were you limited with the people that you could socialize with, or were you encouraged to not get too far afield from your own group as far as that goes?
No, we were okay, but we certainly were instructed to keep our mouths shut. I mean, we had top secret cryptological clearances, and we were warned that basically if you opened up, you would be considered a spy.
Do you think you were watched?
I never thought of that.
No, I'm just wondering.
But I wouldn't be surprised, particularly when we were actually on duty in Japan.
Yeah, wouldn't you suspect that some of the people that were in your kind of outfit were not what they seemed to be?
Good point. That's a good point. I never thought of it. I guess I always felt secure the fact that I could, go off base and make friends As long as I kept my mouth shut about what I did.
Well, I think that's
I'd be
true.
okay, but you're right. I wouldn't be surprised, and you know, the military took that work very seriously.
Yeah, well, they had. I mean, it was very serious, and you were kind of on the frontier of information. Did you get a sense, other than this incident, that you had been kind of the first responder to seeing some things that came across that may have changed plans for military tactics? I mean, did you see things that you thought were of enough significance so that they would cause people in some other Washington or someplace to rethink what they had in mind?
Well, it was incredibly interesting to me that the Russians and the Americans both operated spy ships next to each other. You know, the Russians, they call them fishing ships.
Yeah.
And they have antennas.
Which is kind of ironic.
And they have antennas all over. Everybody knew what they were, but they'd be a Russian fishing ship.
Trawler.
Yeah, a trawler.
Yeah.
And we'd be operating right near them, and we'd be listening to them, they'd be listening to us, and we'd be listening to... In fact, in the communication area, we would listen in on the Americans on the West Coast to listen to telephone traffic and listen to other traffic to make sure that there wasn't something that was going out that would hurt national security. So we were not only listening in on the Soviets and North Koreans, and but we were also listening in on worldwide, we're listening in on everybody, the Egyptians and you know, all of the at the time countries of concern, you know. And but the most interesting thing was out there in the Pacific to see the ships going up and down the coast, each other's coast, listening in.
Yeah.
And basically trying to outdo one another.
Do you think that, how often do you think they sent stuff across just as kind of a blind message, just
I'm sure that
tease you?
I'm sure that happened all the time.
Yeah.
You know, they had, the Russians, I'm sure, had encryption equipment just like we did. As you know, we broke the Nazi code in the Enigma machine, and I'm sure they were always trying to break our codes, and we were always trying to break their codes. And there were people that worked on that. I wasn't associated with it, so I'm not sure exactly what success they had, if any, but there was just a tremendous amount of information coming in. How valuable it was in any specific incident, I can't tell you, other than that particular one about the Pueblo.
Mm-hmm. What it's just as far as the information part of it goes, we're now kind of in this area where we're fighting the Patriot Act and all of that sort of thing. Don't you think it's kind of strange that people are so upset about this eavesdropping now, when this has really gone on ever since electronics has allowed us to do it? I mean, there's a lot of listening going on now, just it has to. I mean, I'm a firm believer in it, but this has gone on for years. I can't quite figure out why there's such a hue and cry now, can you?
Yeah. Other than it just being more sophisticated today. You know,
Yeah.
I think people are, you know, they're getting down to the point now where they're stealing their social security numbers.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so there's a lot of identity.
Well, of course,
theft.
that's, you know, you get into the illegal and the fraudulent part of it.
But I believe the government should have the right to eavesdrop on suspected terrorists and foreigners who are out to harm our country.
No question.
Without people interfering. And this is actually, we're at war now. I mean, it's different. It's a different period of time than it ever has been before, and there's more at risk.
Yeah.
And I want to live in a country where I know that my government and my military is watching out for our well-being. You know.
How do you think this whole concept of encryption and so forth is improved since you were in? I mean, what do you think the advances are? What can they do now that you couldn't do?
Well, look at the internet. You know, I mean, it's got to be highly. You know, they got the satellites now with the digital photography. They can look right through the clouds, and we've seen the images from Iraq, and they can track the troops via satellite, and I'm sure that they can listen from. You know, have transmissions.
So was yours audio and video, or just audio?
Just audio.
Just audio.
Yeah.
Did they have a video capability or a video facility, or you were just listening to messages or communications?
Just listening.
That's interesting. How many people did you have actually working with you and kind of for you and above you? I mean, was this
in Japan?
Yeah.
Oh, at that facility there were a few hundred. In that.
And you were one of several people that did this?
Yes. Oh, yes. There was a shift supervisor for the communication section, which I was in, around the clock. And there were people working around the clock, and we worked staggered shifts, two east. And of course, when the Pueblo was captured, we didn't have any time off. We were working two, right on through 2 days, 2 eves, 2 mids, 2 to...
Now, when you say 2 days, 2 12-hour shifts or 2 8-hour shifts?
There were 2 8-hour shifts in the evening, 2 8-hour shifts all night, and 2 8-hour day shifts. And then it started all over again. Mm-hmm. Because when the Pueblo was captured, the whole world came alive with top priority messages. I mean, the government was looking at everything and trying to do everything it possibly could to get the crewmen out of there because they were suffering terribly. It was just thought of an interesting thing that people who would be interested in learning more about the Pueblo would go back and look at Time magazine, which was published an issue about the Pueblo crewmen's capture and some of the information we got from North Korea about their treatment and so-called tea ceremonies that they participated in. Well, the reality was far more grim than what the North Koreans had led us to believe. You know, that they were humanely taken care of, where actually they were beaten and threatened, and the crewmen sent us messages. When the crew was photographed, supposedly having a little tea ceremony, they had their middle finger extended. And they explained to the North Koreans when they were asked about it that it was a good luck sign. But then Time magazine, when it was published, told the real meaning of the gesture, of course, and then that was the beginning of what the crewmen called Hell Week, because they were tortured and beaten like never before in Hell Week because of what they did. The Koreans felt like they had been duped, and they felt shamed, and they were going to teach the crewmen a lesson, and they did, and they beat them terribly. And Booker, when he was forced to sign the confession, there were some terrible things done to him prior to that point. He was taken into an interrogation room, and there was an officer that had a pistol, and he drew back the slide, and he stood behind him with that pistol aimed right at his head, and he said, "No, you have 2 minutes to sign the confession or be shot. And if you don't sign the confession, you know what we can do," because they had just shown him a South Korean spy. They had a South Korean strapped to the wall in another room, and they had put out his right eye, and there was matter running down his eye and down his right cheek. He had broken arm, broken bone. He basically left there to die. And then that's what the image was that Booker had. And then he was taken into his own interrogation room, and they stood there with a pistol, and they were counting down. And he was relieved at that point, he says. He thought that that would be a blessing, given the options, because he had been beaten terribly. In fact, he had been beaten into unconsciousness just prior to that. And then that didn't work. He's I'm just going to die. That's going to be it. So the 2 minutes went by, and then they came up with another tactic. First they gave him another 2 minutes, and they said, "Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to shoot your crewmen one at a time in your presence until you sign. And if you don't sign this confession that you were a spy, we're going to shoot them one at a time." So they sent for one of the youngest crew members, and they were bringing him to the room. And Booker, just the thought of having his crew shot was just overwhelmed him. And he said, I signed it. They presented me with a confession, and I signed it. I mean, he was willing to give up his life for his country and not admit to anything.
I mean, the stupidity of all of this is that we all knew at the time under what terms he signed the confession. It was a hollow victory at best for the Koreans.
It was.
I hope they're not so naive. Well, I don't know, but I hope they're not so naive as to think that they really achieved anything by this outside of making people even more angry.
It was kind of interesting that you mentioned that, because the agreement that the United States signed with North Korea in order to get the crewmen back at Panmunjom was basically said this, that the United States admits that we had a spy ship, even though we publicly stated that this ship was in international waters, but we admitted that we violated their territorial waters. And then, as part of the agreement, we were able to walk out of the room and admit that what we had just signed was a lie. That was the agreement. We had to sign a confession, but we could admit that the whole thing was just a bogus lie, that we really were in international waters. And that's how we got our crewmen out. And they marched across the bridge one at a time, all 82 or 84 people, plus the coffin of Dwayne Hodges, who was killed on the Pueblo.
What did they do to the ship while these guys were in captivity?
I don't know. It's a closely you think I would know, and there would be published information about what happened to the ship. It's always been.
I would presume they picked it clean.
I'm sure they did, and whether they just turned it into a trawler or whether they put it in their military.
But
The United States never got the ship back.
Oh, it didn't. So they came back on another ship or something.
They were flown back.
They were flown
California
back
to Heroes Welcome.
Yeah, I was going to say, what kind of instructions do you think the captain would get if this happens? Is he given instructions? You got to die first, or use your head, or?
Well, the military code of conduct. They were when the end of suffering didn't stop at Pam and John for his crewmen. You know, there serious questions are raised regarding the military code of conduct while the crewmen were in captivity, and especially Commander Booker's basically confession, his basic confession. That was really called into question. In fact, he was tried by General Court Martial.
Really?
Yeah. Although a later review by the Commander-in-Chief of Pacific Fleet declined the recommendation to continue that because he claimed that he had suffered enough. They had suffered enough. In other words, the poor guy did everything he could, given his story. But he had to testify before the General Inquiry, Military Inquiry Board. And
so even though they were prisoners of war, there was some question about how they conducted themselves.
Right.
Did he stay in the Navy?
He stayed in the Navy for a short time, then retired shortly after, and he took up painting and retired in California.
Probably under a lot of therapy.
I suspect. He went through hell, the poor guy.
And the crewmen, same kind of just phased out of the service?
They get together, there's a Pueblo reunion
I
think once a year.
But they're not in the service anymore.
But I suspect by now they're all retired. That was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But,
do you get together with your mates from the Navy ever?
No, there was never, it's unlike a ship, there was never a real cohesive group. You know, I mean, people came and went every day in our security group.
Really?
We weren't together like maybe some Marines would go out and do some, fight a battle and come back, and there'd be some sort of cohesion there. Our group was come and go. There's a lot of people that went on temporary assignment to Vietnam, temporary assignment to the Pueblo. I had friends on the ship at the time. Like I say, there was no real cohesive group there. We were just communication.
So you had very few people you spent 2 years in Japan with, or 2 years in Alaska?
I didn't have anybody I spent. Alaska, maybe I could count on my one hand.
So the fact that you were in 2 places in 4 years is kind of unusual, in a way.
Yes, I suppose.
Did you go on temporary duty much, if at all?
No, I had an opportunity to volunteer for both the Pueblo and Vietnam. But when my friends came back from both of those duties and people I talked with, it just didn't sound something like that I want to volunteer for. It sounded horrible. I had a friend who went to Vietnam, and he talked about the nonstop sounds of the bombs falling. And I was afraid. I would have gone if the country, of course, wanted me to, but to volunteer, all you got was hazardous sea pay. Yeah. And, not quite enough. Yeah, and I was very content being the supervisor there, and I had a big challenge, operating the communications center. I was very happy in my work, and I wasn't looking for an adventure. I wasn't necessarily deathly afraid of it, but it just didn't sound like something I'd want to volunteer for.
How often did they upgrade your skills, or did you go through any kind of ongoing training program?
Well, we had the testing, of course, for your incremental steps up to petty officer. But there was no ongoing training. I mean, you learned on the job as things changed.
Yeah.
As things changed, you were shown how to do new things. The equipment didn't change all that much in the 4 years I was in. No, we had the same encryption equipment, same offline equipment, and it was basically the same type of work. You might have seen different type of messages, different focus, but the work stayed the same. And my job was to get the messages out as quickly as possible and as accurate as possible to the people that they said they were supposed to go to, and make sure they got to those addresses.
Where was the origin of most of the incoming stuff?
From the Pacific Fleet.
Pacific Fleet?
Yeah.
From Russian ships and Korean ships in the Pacific?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And how was it done in those days? Satellite? Was it satellite transmission?
It was radio via the, I want to say LORAN. We used the LORAN signals for communicating and for identifying where the ships were located. And we used the radio for, we actually sent our messages out on radio frequencies, but they were encrypted. So anybody could grab the information out of the air and listen, but it'd be a bunch of garble.
Yeah.
Because it was all encrypted.
Yeah. And after the service, how did they encourage you to stay in, or
Yes. Yes, they promised us some fairly substantial shipping over bonuses at the time, but working after the Pueblo, that was a very, very stressful time for everybody. We worked, like I said.
How close to that was your enlistment up?
A few months.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in January of '68, the ship was captured. In December, the day before Christmas of '68, the crewmen were released to go home, and my tour was up in February.
Did that influence your decision
Yes.
not to stay in?
It definitely did.
Why? Why is it? I mean, maybe rhetorical. But
I had just worked so hard, and I was working under such stressful conditions that I just didn't feel good. I just felt sick all the time because my gut was just in a knot. I can only imagine what it'd be like to be on the front line in the military, but there's something to be said for the stress that people behind the lines feel when there's something going on, like the Pueblo incident.
But you were not in communication with those people at all?
The crewmen?
Yeah.
No, they were prisoners.
So this was all communication about the situation?
Right.
But what we were doing or not doing?
Communications with the Army, the Air Force.
With the risk of, you can answer this or not, was there ever any thought given to trying to liberate them?
Yes. Oh yes, there were a lot of plans that were put on the table and that were discarded because of the danger to, number one, starting the internet. We're very skittish of the North Koreans. Now, of course, today supposedly they have atomic bomb. Back then they didn't, but we had only stopped fighting with them just a few decades before. And
the French never did stop fighting with them.
Pardon?
The French never did stop fighting.
Right.
Yeah.
There was an armistice, no official truce, but there we are on the 38th parallel. And, as you know, there's been skirmishes all this time back and forth, and these North Koreans, they're very belligerent, and they have a huge military. And I'm sure the concern was that if we went in there to try to get them, like a commando raid of any sort, here they are in one of the biggest cities in North Korea, the biggest military concentration around the harbor of Wonsan. And what would be our chances of coming out with the crew members alive? So they started negotiations soon after their capture, and ultimately it turned out okay.
Did the North Koreans have, as far as you know, any American kind of trained people on their staff to sort through this to help so that there wasn't a big language barrier and so forth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were interpreters
Right.
at the table with us in Panmunjom, and there's photographs of the two sides sitting there at the table.
But I mean, as far as the people in
in the prison?
Yeah.
Yes, there were interpreters at the prison.
So there were people probably educated in this country that maybe.
Yes,
Possible.
that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. What after, as soon as you left the service, I mean, what did you do as far as, taking advantage of this training or experience, or did you just try and spend your time forgetting it?
Well, actually, I was successful in getting a job with the government, the federal government in Syracuse, who had a communication center up there. I applied for and I was awarded a job up there, and to do much the same work that I had been doing. And I had just gotten married, and I really was kind of looking forward to it. And I went up to Syracuse to find a place to live. And I was scared off by the housing prices. I looked at the salary I was going to make, and it was quite a low level starting point.
Yeah.
Better than my military pay, of course, but the money I was making at a job in Horseheads was a lot more, and the living costs were so much greater in Syracuse that I resigned before I even took day one on the job.
You mean they actually have a listening post in Syracuse, New York?
Well, they had a communication center that was attached to the military and to the government. Exactly what their role was, I'm not sure because I never joined up. But yeah, it was very much a center, much like we had in the military.
Well, I guess that kind of goes to the fact that we've been listening to each other's conversations for quite some time.
Right.
And you say you don't have really any connection with the Navy as an alumnus since you got out.
Well, the only connection I have is that I've tried to keep the Remember the Pueblo message alive. You know, people I talk to, I communicate with. It's stuck with me like glue over the years.
That's good.
I'll never forget, you know, the suffering and the pain that I saw, you know, come over the airwaves and reading about it and hearing firsthand and knowing some of my friends were on the ship and it's just it was close to home. It was very close to home and I'll never, as long as I live, stop talking about the Pueblo.
And do you actually, I guess maybe I asked you, do you talk to any of these people that were in this Pueblo incident? I mean, do you communicate with them at all?
No, I don't. I wrote to...
Did they know you? I mean,
yes. Yes, a few of the crew members did know me. I worked with them in Seya. They were on temporary duty aboard the Pueblo. There's a guy named Mailey, communication technician first class, who was even pictured as one of the sailors coming across a bridge of no return in Panmunjom, North Korea. He was a friend of mine. I wrote to Booker a couple times just to tell him he was in my thoughts, never really expecting anything back, and never did. But I told him what my situation was, that I was on the other end of the circuit when you delivered your last message on the Pueblo.
I suspect that it probably his therapist said, forget it.
Yes, he did write a book when
I remember the name.
He retired.
I remember. You know, I'm old enough. I guess you're well old enough.
Once the book was written, though, I think you're right. I think he just wanted to...
That was a catharsis. That helped him sort it out once and for all.
Yes.
What did you do with NYSEG?
Well, the last 20 years of my 32-year career, I was manager. But I worked in clerical jobs, and then I worked in engineering. I worked in gas operations, electric operations. I was a gas manager up in Ithaca. I moved quite a bit with NYSEG, and that's why I don't live in Horseheads right now. Although I did live in Horseheads on 2 different occasions with NYSEG.
Really?
I started my career there in 1969 and 1971, and then in 1982 I went to Newark, New York. Then in 1988 I came back to Horseheads as a manager.
Was Carl, what's this?
Kretsch?
No, the guy who was manager who I thought was ultimately going to be president of NYSEG at one point, but I can't think of his name. But he was a manager of Horseheads for all, and then manager of Ithaca, and then went to Binghamton.
Oh.
He was in that thing. But if you had not gone in the Navy, what do you think you would have done after high school? Stayed on the farm?
I was lost after high school. The military gave me a focus, and in fact I had signed up for college after high school, and I flunked out.
What college did you go to?
Corning Community College. And I flunked out. And I went in the military, and I got out, and I graduated magna cum laude from Elmira College.
Wow.
10 years night school.
Wow.
But my focus was there. Unfortunately, those old grades I had from Corning, all those failed grades were averaged in, and they came back to haunt me.
I think I'd have neglected to bring that up when I applied at Elmira College, but that's how did you keep in touch with your family when you were in the service, since you were in kind of a sensitive area? I'm sure all your mail was looked at pretty carefully.
Well, they said that some of it was screened, but my mother wrote to me religiously.
She didn't get one of these things you hold up and there's lots of holes in it.
No, I didn't see one, but that doesn't mean they didn't open them. My mother wrote to me religiously, and the Red Cross, God bless them, had a program one time around Christmas time and I was in Adak, and I really appreciated it at the time, where my family went in and recorded a little record.
Yeah.
And they sent their picture and a record to me in Adak, Alaska, wishing me a Merry Christmas, and that was so nice. And I always remember the Red Cross. There's always a special place in my heart for the Red Cross because of that.
Did you have a girlfriend at the time you went in the service?
Yes.
And
Well, I was engaged.
she stuck with it for 4 years?
No. Neither one of us did. No, the engagement was broken, and
So when you came home, you got a fresh start.
yes.
That's Horseheads lady?
Yes, actually, yeah. She graduated also from Horseheads High School. She's 2 years younger than me, but
Yeah.
Pamela Winowski.
Well, that's great. That's great. But I was going to say that, you know, being in the area here, and there's not a lot you can say about what you do. Or
Well, today it's not so bad. You know, I mean, I certainly didn't keep any notes to reflect on. And
yeah,
to
but I
talk
mean, when
about.
you're in the service, you write home and say, "Dear Mom, I just."
When I was in service, I could tell her where I was, and she knew I was in communications, but that's about it. She.
What kind of a family did you have? And was it mom, dad, and what?
I had 3 siblings.
Yes.
Mother, dad, and a brother and 2 sisters.
Any of them in the service besides and your
My
siblings?
father was in World War II.
Uh-huh.
He was in the Marines, served in Guam in the Pacific. And in fact, I'm going to talk to him about coming down and
Oh, I'd love to.
doing a video.
That would be great. That would be great.
Yeah.
But did that influence you going in the Navy, or was it just this friend of yours from Horseheads that?
Well, I think it had a little bit to do with it.
Yeah.
To go in the military.
Yeah, but you were tempted to go in the Marines, obviously.
Uh,
I never was, by the way.
No. I actually was leaning more toward the Air Force. I had an uncle who was in the Air Force, and he had a nice career. He traveled the world. He really enjoyed himself. And I think it was just that conversation I had with my friend. Well, let's go together. We can support each other, and there isn't anything that can happen that we won't get through because we'll be there together. And of course, one day later, by the time.
Well, but you know, it is interesting. I speak for myself, and it's nice to hear you say it. The service did add a lot of focus to it. It added humility, it added focus, it added realism, it added maturity. For me, it was probably the most productive 4 years of my life, if not the best, but
Yeah,
certainly the most productive.
I'd second.
And you didn't stay in the reserves or anything when you got out.
Inactive for 2 years, of course, to fulfill my 6-year obligation.
Now, how a 6-year obligation? That's unusual, isn't it? Or I thought enlistments were like 2 or 4 years.
Mine was 6 years, 4 years active and 2 years inactive.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out, they couldn't wait to get rid of us. I mean, we couldn't stay in the reserves if we wanted to.
Uh-huh.
That was in 1954 or 55.
Oh, okay.
I was there right after the Korean War, and
Uh-huh.
I was in the Air Force, and they had more people than they obviously needed.
I think during Vietnam, I think that was pretty much standard.
So, what in your 2 years in the reserves? What did you do?
Nothing. I was just.
Did you go to meetings or anything?
No, it was inactive.
Did your rank go up?
No, nothing. Actually, it was no different than if I had been discharged in April of 1969, with the exception I didn't get my discharge until 2 years later.
Okay.
When they mailed it to me and said, okay, your military obligation is fulfilled now after 6 years.
So the no pay, no benefits,
no meetings.
and so the only if we had another war, you'd have been there.
One of the first to be called up, I suppose. Especially if my rate was needed at the time, communications.
Did you stay in any veterans organizations? You belonged to the VFW?
I did belong. I
Legion,
did belong to the VFW when I lived in Horseheads after I got out of the service, and no, it was it was the American Legion. And then when I moved, I dropped my membership, and I haven't been back since.
Yeah, the Horseheads has a very active and a very interesting Legion. I mean, I'm a member. I haven't been there in years and years, but post 442, it's a brand new building now on Ithaca Road. It's really great.
Used to know the commander there, and it was a woman, Sheeter.
Yeah,
Dr. Sheeter's wife.
Georgianne Sheeter. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, I was involved in the Legion at that point, actually. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, just in parting to say that I think the Pueblo crewmen eloquently express the most important reason why I think it's necessary to remember events like the Pueblo, and they said that, hey, we were eyewitnesses to the horrors of communists and these North Koreans, what they can do to people, and what kind of society it really is. And they wouldn't wish the experience on anyone, but if the people in the United States could go through what they did, we'd all realize what we have in a free country. And I think in closing that would sum up.
Yeah, I think the being a prisoner of war is without compare, and I've had the privilege of interviewing several people who were prisoners of war,
Have you really?
and it's you don't ever forget it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's very difficult to talk about it, but you never forget it.
Yeah,
It's an
I'm
experience,
sure.
and I'm sure yours was a little vicarious, but you obviously have not forgotten it either.
No.
And I think you're right. I agree with you. We do need to preserve what we have, and I think we have to appreciate it through the sacrifices of other people.
Yes.
Bruce, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed talking to
Pleasure,
you.
Tom. Thank you very much.